Welcome to week 5 of SED 445, where we are going to discuss applied behavior analysis. This lecture video I am breaking up into two 15-minute chunks, and here is part 1. So we're going to dig right into applied behavior analysis. We're going to, in these videos, discuss 6 principles of ABA, applied behavior analysis, which will overlap in our class. Behavioral interventions are based on a set of principles that explain the relationship of human behavior to immediate environmental events that occur before and after the behavior being studied. So, I am asking you to be a behavior detective, to observe behaviors. So sometimes that might not be clear exactly what the behavioral string of antecedent behavior consequence is. So you may want to start off by selecting 1 or 2 students ahead of time to observe, and you may want to switch it up every couple of days until you figure out who you want your target student to be for your project. So applied behavior analysis, what is it? It assumes that we are interested in more than just behavior management. So this is really talking about shaping behaviors and teaching behaviors that are functionally equivalent. We're going to talk a little bit about what does functional mean. We're interested in understanding behavior and its functional relationship to environmental stimuli. So function means the purpose of a behavior. So we are, in ABA assumes past learning and biological makeup affect current behavior. So if you think of very young students, their past learning, if they were maybe in an early intervention preschool, their behaviors may look much different than if they are just entering school for the first time, okay? Voluntary behavior is governed by the same principles, whether it's appropriate or inappropriate. And the key word here is voluntary behavior because we are selecting behaviors for this project that are voluntary because they're much easier to shape. We are also selecting voluntary behaviors because that way we are sure it's not a part of a disabling condition or anything like that. Behavior serves a purpose, like I said, which is called the function. So you're going to be hearing that a lot in your work towards learning about behavior. Behavior is related to environment in which it occurs. This helps us to understand the way behavior functions, the environmental factors that influence it, and it requires studying in the context of the immediate situation and examining stimuli that precede and follow the behavior. So as we move on in this class, IBCP step 3, it's not really worksheet 3, we'll look at data collection methods and environment. So we'll be digging into that a little bit more. So there's 3 basic functions of behavior. 1, to obtain something positive. 2, to escape or avoid something aversive. Or 3, sensory regulation or sensory stimulation. We also need to just consider sometimes behaviors occur because it can. So in other words, students know they can get away with it, and this may be because consequences have been inconsistent or ineffective. But oftentimes, if students know that expectations are not consistent, they will behave in ways just because they can. So consequences need to be consistent, especially for when you're working with a behavior plan for it to work. So principle number 1, behavior is controlled by its consequences. So generally we have reasons for our behaviors, okay? And those reasons are usually because if we behave in a certain way, we will have a consequence. So we go to work every day because the consequence is we get a paycheck, right? So involuntary behaviors should not be the focus of this project. I'm just going to reiterate because we're considering, if someone had a disability, we would not be focusing that on our projects, okay? So the ABCs of ABA. So you've got antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So A for antecedent, antecedent stimuli. So antecedent means preceding. Most people assume behavior is controlled by antecedent stimuli, but antecedent stimuli most effectively control behavior when a student discriminates that a certain consequence will follow their behavior. So the relationship between the behavior and the consequence must be predictable. The repeated association with consequence helps students to learn. And when student learns the behaviors, learns the relationship between behavior and consequence, they have acquired what's called a discrimination. And when this happens, we say the behavior is under stimulus control and no longer have to directly experience the consequence. So when we think about, for example, animals, dogs, when we take them outside to use the bathroom and come back in, what do they usually get? They usually get a treat for being such a good boy. So that dog will start to expect that after I go outside, I get to come back in and enjoy a treat. So after, the training phase, you might be able to get away with taking them outside, bringing them back in, and not having to directly reinforce immediately what a good boy your dog was, right? So the antecedent stimuli becomes a consequence stimuli when the target has figured out the predictability. So, when we are, again, consistent, this makes it much easier for someone to learn the replacement behavior. If consequences are not predictable, students may not learn stimulus control and instead begin to rely on other discriminative stimuli. So they may be acting out in different ways. So other discriminative stimuli, for example, a student might make a silly noise and they learn that, okay, when I make a silly noise, all these other kids laugh and think it's funny and I want attention. So we want to make sure that consequences are predictable. And when I say consequence, that does not always mean a negative. So consequence is immediately after the behaviors, whatever happens after the behavior. If a behavior is particularly challenging for a student's ability, teachers may have to reinforce successive approximations to the desired behavior. So this is known as shaping. So that just means successive, approximations means small steps towards the ultimate goal. So you're kind of breaking it down. So, you might ask a student to raise his hand instead of blurting out. And, if that is one step in, many steps of being able to work for a full 10 minutes long without interruption, then that is a small step for them. Principle number 2, behavior is strengthened or maintained by reinforcement. So there is positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement, presentation of consequence maintains or strengthens behavior over time. So you're adding something in, okay? The challenge of reinforcement, what may be positively reinforcing to one student may not be reinforcing for another. So, for example, a sticker chart. Let's think about that. Not all students, will work for a sticker. So we have to keep that in mind. So negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement, don't associate with anything bad, okay? So just negative in this sense means behavior may be strengthened or maintained of its functions to avoid or escape an aversive stimulus. So for example, trying to get out of something. So something painful, uncomfortable, embarrassing, or threatening, to take away something that is reinforcing. All right, so let's give another example. So aversive stimulus, something, but we need to know the motivation, first of all, of why the student is behaving in a certain way. So if they're trying to get out of something, try to build in a positive behavior that will get them out of whatever that is, right? You want it to be functionally equivalent. So for example, and this is a positive behavior that I wear my seatbelt. So I wear my seatbelt because that is negative reinforcement, because I am avoiding a dangerous situation. I most of the time go the speed limit because the negative reinforcement that I get from going the speed limit is I am not going to get an expensive speeding ticket because I've gotten a couple of those. All right, so negative reinforcement means you're avoiding something. So for another classroom example, you think about the student who never makes eye contact, and all of a sudden you see those eyes and you call on the student. And that may not be something that they want. They may be avoiding eye contact with you because they are avoiding getting called on, okay? So you got to think about what is the motivation for behavior, okay? Principle number 3, behavior is weakened by withholding the consequences that have maintained it. So this course is all about positive behavior support and strengthening behaviors, but we can't ignore the flip side, which is eliminating the maladaptive behaviors. We focus on replacement, but sometimes the behavior is dangerous or so ingrained that we do need to rely on the consequences. So extinction. This is another word for basically ignoring, but I don't like using the word ignore because nobody wants their child to be ignored. So when you're discussing this strategy with a parent, you would want to say withholding attention because this is much more appropriate to say than ignoring, because you're not ignoring, you're ignoring the behavior, yes, but you're withholding withholding attention from that behavior. It just sounds much better, more palatable for parents to hear. So for extinction to work, you must know which consequences have been supporting the target behavior, and these consequences must be under your control. Again, knowing the function. Extinction is not likely to be effective in reducing behaviors when you can't identify the reinforcer, or the reinforcer is out of your control, or if the behavior has been maintained by intermittent positive reinforcement. So maybe that student is engaging in the same behavior in a different classroom and is somehow being reinforced for it, okay? This works best in association with when paired with positive reinforcement. Extinction takes time, and at first there may be a temporary increase in the target behavior. If you can't tolerate a temporary increase in the behavior, then you might want to find a different strategy, because students will often figure out, okay, well, if she's ignoring me when I'm blurting out, she must not be hearing me. Just an example. And so that student's going to just get louder and louder. This is called an extinction burst. And so when you're first starting an intervention and you're using this strategy, there will be an extinction burst. It's going to ramp up the behaviors before they finally go away. Okay, so just be aware of that. Extinction is not always an option, especially when there is safety involved. So we would not use this strategy when, a student is trying to bolt or run across the street, just for example. So you would not want to withhold attention from that behavior, because that is a safety issue. Okay, so I'm going to end this video and I'm going to pick it up in a moment. So I look forward to seeing you there.